Detective Samuel Turner opened a box that destroyed his career and exposed a system built on corruption and racism. Inside were damning records and footage implicating his colleagues and himself. Now, shunned by his peers and family, he faces an impossible choice: stay silent or fight for the justice he once betrayed. What happens next will shock you. Let's begin. Detective Samuel Turner had always prided himself on his unflinching dedication to the job. With 25 years on the force, he had built a reputation as a sharp investigator with a tough exterior. But on this otherwise ordinary morning, Samuel's life took an unexpected turn. The day began with the usual rhythm of the precinct: officers bustling between desks, phones ringing incessantly, and the smell of burnt coffee permeating the air. Amid the commotion, a delivery box appeared on Samuel's desk. The package was unremarkable at first glance: brown cardboard, sealed with standard packing tape. There was no return address, just a single phrase scrawled on the top in bold black letters: "For justice." Samuel frowned. His instincts instantly piqued. Years on the force had taught him to be wary of anything out of the ordinary. He inspected the box carefully, running his fingers along its edges. Deciding there was no immediate threat, he fetched a utility knife and sliced through the tape. Inside was a puzzling collection of items: manila folders stuffed with documents, several grainy photographs, and a small thumb drive tucked into a plastic sleeve. Samuel's gut tightened as he examined the first folder. The papers contained detailed case notes and records, but something about them felt off. Moving to the photographs, he recognized scenes from crime investigations. Some he had been part of, others involving officers he knew. His pulse quickened as he flipped through the images. When he plugged the thumb drive into his computer, dread settled in his chest. The screen flickered to life, showing surveillance footage from various arrests. The angles were clear, as though filmed by someone with insider knowledge. Samuel leaned closer, his breath hitching as he realized what he was seeing: officers planting drugs and weapons at crime scenes. The final video hit him like a punch to the gut. There he was, younger but unmistakable, standing beside two other officers. The three of them were placing a small bag of narcotics into a car, while a suspect was restrained nearby. Samuel felt his hands tremble as he paused the video. The implications were devastating, not just for him, but for the entire precinct. Among the names listed in the documents was one he couldn't ignore: Michael Brooks. Samuel had heard of the prosecutor's relentless pursuit of justice, particularly in exposing racial bias within the criminal justice system. The cases shown in the footage were ones Brooks had fought against, often arguing they were built on shaky grounds. Samuel had dismissed Brooks as an idealist back then, but now the truth was undeniable. The prosecutor had been right all along. The weight of the evidence was suffocating. Samuel's heart pounded as he stared at the screen, each image and document confirming the scope of the corruption he had been blind to or complicit in. He pushed back from his desk, running a hand over his face. The cryptic words on the box's label echoed in his mind: "For justice." What justice, he thought bitterly, when the system itself was rotten? Yet, he knew one thing for certain: his life, and many others, would never be the same. Detective Samuel Turner sat at his desk. The damning evidence from the mysterious box spread out before him. His thoughts were a whirlwind of disbelief, guilt, and fear. The contents of the box had left no room for doubt. Systemic corruption ran deep within the precinct, and he had been part of it. His hands hovered over the documents, but he couldn't bring himself to touch them again. The faces of those implicated, officers he had worked with for years, flashed in his mind like ghosts, haunting his conscience. Among them, his own face loomed largest, He knew he couldn't keep this to himself, but whom could he trust? After several moments of hesitation, Samuel picked up his phone and dialed Officer Rachel Hayes. Rachel, his partner of 5 years, was one of the few people in the precinct who didn't shy away from calling out injustice. Her vocal stance against racial bias had earned her both respect and derision from her peers. But Samuel knew she was the only one who could help him now. Rachel arrived quickly, her sharp eyes taking in the chaotic spread on his desk. "What's all this?" she asked, crossing her arms. Samuel didn't reply immediately, instead gesturing toward the evidence. Her expression darkened as she skimmed through the materials, her lips pressing into a thin line. By the time she reached the video of Samuel and the other officers, her anger was palpable. "Sam, this is—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "This is career-ending. For you, for them, for all of us if this leaks." "I know," Samuel muttered, his voice heavy with regret. "But I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't think—" "You didn't think?" Rachel snapped, cutting him off. "You were there, Sam. Ignorance doesn't excuse this. These people, these cases, their lives ruined because of us. And you're telling me you didn't know?" He looked away, shame crawling up his neck. "I didn't want to know." Rachel sighed, her anger giving way to determination. "We report this, Sam," she said firmly. "If we don't, we're no better than them." Before Samuel could respond, a voice interrupted. "Detective Turner," it said, cold and steady. Both detectives turned to see Michael Brooks, the prosecutor whose name had been written across many of the documents, standing in the doorway. The tension in the room spiked immediately. "Mr. Brooks," Samuel began, but Brooks cut him off, his eyes like steel. "I believe you have something of mine." Samuel hesitated for only a moment before reaching for the box and handing it over. "I didn't know they'd go this far," he admitted quietly. Brooks studied him, his sharp features unreadable. "Your ignorance doesn't absolve you, detective," he said, his tone carrying a weight of disappointment. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then, with the box in hand, Brooks turned to leave. Samuel slumped back into his chair as Rachel gave him a hard look. "You've got a choice, Sam," she said softly. "Are you going to do the right thing, or let this drown you?" Samuel didn't answer, but in his gut, he knew there was no turning back. The prosecutor's office wasted no time in launching a full-scale public investigation. Michael Brooks, bolstered by the evidence from the mysterious box, stood at the forefront, addressing the press with a calm yet fiery resolve. "The time for silence is over," he declared in a televised statement. "We will uncover the truth, hold the guilty accountable, and begin to mend what's been broken." The media descended like vultures, their cameras and headlines illuminating every corner of the precinct's systemic corruption. Stories of racially motivated arrests and falsified evidence dominated the news cycle. Images of Samuel Turner's younger self, planting evidence in the now viral footage, became symbolic of the scandal. Samuel, suspended from duty, found himself at the center of a storm. The precinct's halls, once a place of camaraderie for Samuel, became hostile territory. Former colleagues whispered behind his back, their disdain palpable. To them, he wasn't a whistleblower. He was a traitor. At home, the atmosphere was equally strained. His wife, Julia, looked at him with a mix of disbelief and hurt, while his teenage daughter avoided him altogether. "How could you be part of something like this?" Julia demanded one night, her voice cracking. Samuel had no answer. He had always justified his actions as following orders, but now, the weight of his complicity crushed him. Meanwhile, Michael Brooks faced his own challenges. As the face of the investigation, he became a lightning rod for backlash. Anonymous threats flooded his office. His home address was leaked online, and protesters, some organized by police unions, gathered outside his house. Yet, Brooks remained steadfast, his focus unshaken. "They want to intimidate me into stopping," he told a close ally. "But I've spent my career fighting for people who had no voice. I won't stop now." As the investigation deepened, more victims came forward, their stories painting a harrowing picture of injustice. Among them was Erica Johnson, a middle-aged mother whose 22-year-old son, Jamal, had been wrongfully imprisoned on fabricated drug charges. She took the stand during a hearing, her voice trembling with emotion, but gaining strength with every word. "You stole my son's life," she said, her eyes scanning the courtroom. "For 3 years, I've visited him in a cold cell, watched him grow older, angrier, and more distant. He missed his sister's graduation, his grandmother's funeral, and his own future." Her voice broke, but she pressed on. "You owe us more than apologies. You owe us justice, and you owe us change." Her testimony struck a nerve, galvanizing public outrage. Vigils and protests sprang up across the city, demanding accountability. Erica's voice became a rallying cry for those who had suffered in silence. For Samuel, her words were a dagger to the heart. He sat in the courtroom gallery, his face lined with regret. In Erica, he saw not just a grieving mother, but a reflection of the damage he had helped perpetuate. It was no longer just about redemption. It was about repairing the irreparable. Samuel knew that his actions going forward would determine whether he was remembered as a man who turned a blind eye, or one who finally chose to fight for what was right. Months later, the courthouse buzzed with tension as spectators, reporters, and families packed the gallery. The trial of corrupt officers had gripped the city, each revelation peeling back layers of systemic rot. The culmination of months of evidence and testimonies was finally here. As the judge entered the room, the crowd fell silent, anticipation thick in the air. Judge Reynolds, known for his no-nonsense demeanor, began reading the verdicts. One by one, the names of the accused officers were called. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each pronouncement was a nail in the coffin of careers, once built on betrayal and abuse of power. The once proud officers sat with slumped shoulders, their faces pale and devoid of the bravado they'd carried into the courtroom months earlier. Their reputations lay in ruins, their lives irreparably changed. Samuel Turner sat in the gallery, his heart heavy. Unlike the others, he had taken the stand, testifying against his peers. His admission of guilt and cooperation had earned him leniency, but it came at a steep price. His badge was gone, his career over. Yet, as the verdicts were read, Samuel felt an odd sense of peace. He had made mistakes, devastating ones, but today, justice had spoken. After the session adjourned, Samuel approached Michael Brooks, who was surrounded by a cluster of reporters. As Brooks noticed him, the prosecutor's expression hardened. Undeterred, Samuel extended his hand. "I know I can't undo the harm I helped cause," Samuel said, his voice low but resolute. "But I want to help. Tell me what I can do." Brooks studied him for a moment, his face a mask of skepticism. The weight of his decision was evident. Finally, he spoke, his tone measured. "If you're serious, detective." He paused, correcting himself. "Mr. Turner, use your voice. Speak up. People listen to you. Help them see the need for change." Samuel nodded, gratitude and determination etched into his face. From that day forward, he threw himself into advocacy, speaking at community centers, schools, and town halls. He shared his story, laying bare the dark truths of the system he had once served and the personal toll of his complicity. His candidness resonated with audiences, earning him both respect and scorn. For Samuel, the journey was about more than redemption. It was about ensuring no one else would endure what the victims of his past actions had. Months later, in a small, crowded room at a community center, a powerful moment unfolded. Erica Johnson sat beside her son, Jamal, who had been released after 3 years of wrongful imprisonment. The two embraced tightly, their joy palpable as applause erupted around them. Tears streamed down Erica's face as she whispered, "You're home now. That's all that matters." Across the room, Samuel watched the scene unfold. Standing beside him, Brooks caught his eye. The two exchanged a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement of their intertwined paths. They had come from opposite sides of a fractured system, but both were now part of something greater, a movement ignited by a simple, mysterious box. That box, with its cryptic message and explosive contents, had exposed corruption and sparked a reckoning. More importantly, it proved that even in the darkest shadows, there is a light that can lead to change.